As I was thinking about today, engineers built the world that we live and work in. They did. Of course, we're in the natural world, but engineers are going to rebuild it in the future. And so the work that you do or are training to do, it's important. Our society needs it. So thank you for that. Thank you for what you do. Well, what do I hope to achieve today is to give you some perspective of leadership, and I'll say I built it around transportation since that's been my experience over the last several years. But you can apply this to any area, I think. I've just picked a few things out of this basket. So I want to give you some perspective of leadership from a practitioner standpoint in both the public and the private sector. Two sides of the same coin, but there are differences to be sure. My hope is, and that's why I had to say good morning twice, is that this will be interactive. We'll be thinking of your questions, your comments. Otherwise, this could get to be kind of boring listening to me speak, and it could be a fairly short session. So be thinking of your questions and comments. First, I want to give you a little bit of background about John Craig. So I was born and raised in Missouri, one of 7 kids. Graduated with master's and bachelor's degrees from Missouri and the University of Alaska at Fairbanks. That's a ways north. It's kind of unique in itself. Spent a career in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as a green suitor, that is a military officer, and part of the career paths for a military officer is one of them is you can spend half of your career with the military, that is troops, and the other half, I'll say, with civil works. And so my final assignment, believe it or not, was with the Missouri River Division, which no longer exists, and it was on West Center Road in Omaha, Nebraska. Hard to believe. Had the Reservoir Control Center that monitored and controlled the releases of water from the 6 main stem dams on the Missouri River and so on and so forth. So no longer exists, and part of the reason is they combined with the North Pacific Division in Portland, Oregon, into one division that's now called the Northwestern Division, and it essentially, and I'm oversimplifying things, comprises both the Missouri River Basin and the Columbia River Basin. So it's the actual boundaries for that division and the various districts, which include Omaha and Kansas City districts. It's actually broader than just those two drainage basins. So when I retired, shortly after I retired from the Corps of Engineers, the newly elected governor of the state of Nebraska, Mike Johans, invited me to be his director of the Nebraska Department of Roads, and it was the best job I've ever had. It was wonderful. Great people in the department. Randy Peters, I'm glad Randy is here. Absolutely a great person, a great industry, great contractors, great consultants. It's a terrific industry in Nebraska, and it's a terrific relationship between the Department of Roads and the University of Nebraska. And I think, although I've lost track of that, the relationship is about 100 years long relationship between the Department of Roads and the University of Nebraska. So that's probably part of the reason I'm here, and I'm certainly glad to be here. Well, I spent a little more than 10 years in the Department of Roads. Loved it, hard to leave, but as I approached my 10th year, knowing there was some risk in leaving, and we could talk about risks in all kinds of arenas. So if you wanted to ask questions about risk, whether it's career or actual work, civil engineering work and other, I would be happy to engage in that. But as I was approaching my 10th year in the Department of Roads, I thought, well, what do I want to be? What do I want to do next? What do I want to do when I grow up? And I thought one of the pieces that was missing in the education of John Craig was experience in the private sector. And so I began to speak to some people. And I was invited by Floor Enterprises. Now, mind you, Floor is a big organization 50,000 employees. They do 85% of their work overseas. But they invited me, HDR Engineering. HDR is located in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm sure you're familiar with them. And the Oregon Department of Transportation, whom I knew a little bit, invited me to interview to be the director of the Oregon Bridge Delivery Partners, which was the 50-50 joint venture of Fluor and HDR. Deliver, prepare to replace 365 bridges. It was a couple of $1 billion program. It was difficult. It was a challenging transition. But I learned things that I would have not learned any other way. Spent 6 years in Oregon, returned to Nebraska. Nebraska's home. I'm glad to be here. But it was a terrific learning experience, as was my time in the Corps of Engineers. Learned a lot about the world in the Corps, Asia, Europe, Africa, Alaska, many of the contiguous United States. And Oregon expanded my view from a different perspective. I wasn't a director for a state DOT. I was looking up, but I was working for them. So that's unique in itself. It was a great experience. So while I knew there were risks involved, and I questioned myself many times, was that a good career move by John Craig? In hindsight, I think it was exactly the right thing to do. I learned things that I wouldn't learn any other way. And that program really is, I think, significant nationally. It's also very unique. So, what is leadership? That's a question. So I Googled yesterday the definition of leadership, and I got 47,900 hits, right? And no one leadership definition is correct. It's that amorphous. We all kind of know it when we see it, but there really is not a clear definition. There's a couple of things I would add to the subject of leadership. One, it is not a position you hold. As the director of the Department of Roads or the director of the Oregon Bridge Delivery Partners in Oregon did not automatically make me a leader. Now, one would hope that you are also a leader, but it's not contingent. Being a leader is not contingent on the position you hold. It's an activity. It depends on who you are. So you can be anywhere in an organization, any organization, university, private sector, public sector, and you can provide leadership. There are various components to that, and hopefully we'll spend some time discussing that rather than talking about it. And I'll say effective leadership, and that's probably the operative word. Effective leadership is really not about making speeches or being liked or being popular. And it makes me think a little bit about politics, right? That's not leadership. That is what it is. Leadership is defined by results. And if you're not getting results, you're not providing leadership. You can disillusion yourself, I think, that, well, you hold a position and you're providing leadership and you're important. But that is not leadership. If you're not getting results, you're not leading anything. That's another aspect, I think, that's important to remember. My own definition, which I've pretty much adopted, is good leadership is getting people to willingly follow you in doing something, in accomplishing something. That's a mouthful. It's not simple. I'd also say that it's something I aspire to. It's not something that I feel like I've ever achieved, and I think that's probably true for most people. You aspire to be a better leader. Being exactly right or any finality in that, I certainly don't have that. I work on that skill set every day. There are going to be several themes that I'll touch upon, and I think you'll note them. And again, ask questions and make comments as I touch upon them. Get off the first slide here. And so these are some characteristics I listed. You can see them, I think, of a leader. Call them attributes, call them what you may, adjectives and nouns. I'd ask, and this is the point where I'd like you to look at these and engage me in some discussion. Do you agree with these attributes? Do you have questions about them? Can you think of others? This is not a complete list by any means. And who do you admire as a leader, and why? So let me just give you a few moments to look at the slide and hopefully ask some questions or make some comments. I'll kick this off while you're looking at this. You know, one of the, I hadn't consciously focused on some of the elements here until I'll say the last 10 years or so, including at the Department of Roads. One of them is humility. And, you know, we all can think of people that are verbose, egotistical, but I think that is a valuable characteristic of leadership is humility. You don't think, you know, too highly of yourself. It's not about you, it's about others. So that was one that, you know, I went for years and didn't really think about that particular characteristic, but that's an element, one element that I think is key to good leadership. Questions, comments about this list? Yes. Well, that's a good question I didn't anticipate. You know, I think most of us would agree that what we'd like to get is successful results. But I think one of the characteristics of a good leadership is you're going to run into failures, right? And it's not that you've failed, it's not that you've run into a failure, it's how do you respond to that? And that's an important aspect of leadership. You run into a failure, and I think then you have to go, all right, what did we learn from this? How can we do better? And so leadership's involved in failure, and that's one of the, I think that's one of the key elements, because everything doesn't succeed. Things can be difficult, and I think effective leadership is especially critical when something fails. And I would say a leader, if they're doing their job, they're responsible for everything that does or does not go on in their team or their organization. You can't blame others. You're the leader, and so you take responsibility for that. You step back and say, all right, what did we learn in this? We didn't accomplish, we didn't succeed in what we wanted to do. What did we learn? How can we turn that into a success, improve in the future? That is a great question. Great question. Other questions?
Yeah, I always think that we need leadership. We need leaders not just for like civil stuff generally, but we want like specific on transportation. Because you know, a good planner, and if you are a leader, you have big picture, so the society and the whole city will benefit, you know, in the long run. So one, I would say like foresight, or I don't know what that word.
No, those are excellent comments, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself. These are great questions. One of the things I learned when I went to Oregon, and I learned this before, so I relearned it, right? Sometimes I don't retain the lessons, but I somehow keep relearning it in many ways. It's a good thing. The issues that existed in Oregon, first of all, I went out there, was invited to go out because they had problems. They were $58 million over budget. They had relationship problems. You'll hear me talk about relationships a little bit later. The fundamental issues that they had were not engineering issues at all. The engineering could be done. That people were good at that. They were people issues. And so you're gonna hear me talk about people a little bit too. And in order to do that, to have an appreciation for it, I think you do leadership at any position, you have to back up a little bit and see the big picture. And it can be hard to do because there's lots of things that want to drag you down into the details. And once you do that, you can't help. It's hard to help. You're down in the trenches as opposed to saying, all right, what's doing an assessment, where do we stand, what do we need to do, and then providing the leadership to move forward. So it's great comments. Great comments. Thank you. Any others? These are good. My understanding is we're also going to, some of us are going to be able to meet for lunch when this is over, and so be thinking of your questions for that. This is exactly what I wanted to occur. Yes, sir. You know, without knowing it, I've been exercising reverse mentoring for many years. Mentoring, you normally think of somebody who's experienced, some higher level, mentoring somebody that's younger and less experienced, right? That's kind of the traditional explanation. Reverse mentoring, and I'll say my career has been based on reverse mentoring, is those people that are less experienced and more technically competent, I'll say, are mentoring the more experienced person, which is me. I'm a great example. And so it's one of the things in terms of open communications that you have to allow yourself to be open to not only leading people, but having them lead you and mentoring you. I can't tell you how much I've learned from people that have worked for me, I've worked with, and frankly that I've worked for. And I call that reverse mentoring, when you don't normally think of it that way, the people that work for you. But were it not for the people that worked for me teaching me what I needed to know, I would not be where I'm at. And so that, to me, is reverse mentoring. And I'm grateful to all of the people that I've worked with and that have worked for me, because they've, I credit them for more of my success than myself, quite frankly. They've done a great job. So, and any flaws, any faults are mine alone, not theirs. They've done the best they can. So it's absolutely true in the Department of Roads. It's true in the Corps of Engineers. It's true in Oregon. So reverse mentoring is not a common set of terms, but it's important. I think you need to be open to people teaching you. Yes. You're spot on, and that's shame on me for not having communication up there, because you're exactly right, and it's a two-way street, and I'll talk about that a little bit too. So you're exactly right. In fact, virtually everything goes back to communications, including setting the vision and the things you just mentioned. So thank you. That's a good one. Any others? Respect. There it is. Yeah, it's on there, but it's in script, so it's a little hard to see. And it's, I'll expand on respect. You're exactly right. It's mutual respect, right? I mean, it's a two-way street, and you know, it's when things are going smoothly. It's easy to stand up and say you're a leader, but when things aren't, it's easy for a lot of things to erode, including mutual respect, which leads to open and honest communications, especially when things are difficult, or when you've got issues and you're having trouble coming to some agreement. So respect is it's fundamental to relationships. It's a good point. Good point. I really want the questions. Yes, Randy. Activity. That's a great question, because people will lull themselves into, well, you don't feel like you have a position of any authority. You know, you're not a manager like Randy's saying, or a supervisor or something. but you've got your own personal perspective, your own valuable personal perspective, and to simply bring up your viewpoint to say, you know, maybe this is something we can do a little better about, or this is something we need to do. You can begin to take a leadership position in terms of making changes. Don't feel, no one should ever feel that they don't have the authority to do that. A good running organization, one that's really, everything's greased well, depends on everybody's input. And for a person to say, you know, we're, I'm making this up a little bit, but not entirely, our invoices, we're not, you know, we could get those in a lot quicker than we are if we just did X, Y, and Z. And if somebody sees that and brings it up and takes a little bit of a leadership position, and the risk with that is somebody might say, well, good, why don't you lead that effort? And that's not a bad thing, because that's the way I believe you get recognized and move up an organization, is you bring up good ideas, take some initiative on your standpoint as an individual, and make something happen. I mean, that's what, that's how you get results, right? If you sit back and you go, well, all right, I'll get, you know, nobody's ever going to listen to me, and you know, I'm still getting my paychecks, so everything's good. That's not exercising leadership, and you're discounting yourself. And there are lots of opportunities for improvement, lots. And good, well-run organizations need all of them. You can't do them all. You have to prioritize and so on and so forth. But that's a long-winded response, Randy, to a great, great question. That too. Confidence is another, I don't know that I have it up there, but it's another word, along with humility, I'll say. Confidence is important in providing leadership. And the more you do it, the more you exercise it, I think the more comfortable you get in doing that. So these are some of the reasons why there's no one definition of leadership, right? It's a complicated subject, which I will talk about. I have a feeling maybe I should keep moving on so that we don't run out of time. So somebody give me the hook. Yes. Okay. Oh, I do. That's the observation that they pretty neat. Spend all the time learning technical and deep, and I agree, you need to have that. The question is, can you teach leadership? You can teach technical skills, and that's what it is. Here's my opinion, and there will be people that will disagree with it. I don't believe that you can. I think you have to experience it. You learn it through work. But there are lots of people that would push back and say, well, we've got a course here and a course, and there are courses in Nebraska that you can get a degree in leadership. Going, I don't think that's true. You're going to hear me talk about, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, about leadership versus management, which is a distinction. And we need both. We need all these things. You can't, leadership without technical excellence, which you're learning, you can't get it done. You need both. It's not, they're not mutually exclusive. You need them both. So let me drive on here. It's an excellent point, Larry. So thank you for bringing that up. So using that as a little bit of a segue, there are three subjects of which I've only highlighted two here that I want to drill into just a little bit. And one is leadership versus management. I talked about that. One is trust, and one is collaboration. So I just pulled off some of the characteristics from the previous slide, and so let me move on with this. And some of this will sound familiar to Randy and I. worked together for a long time, for many years. It is John Craig's opinion that you lead people and manage things. Now, this is a distinction. You can't, people resist being managed. If you ask yourself, you want somebody micromanaging, managing you, telling you what to do, that's not what you want. You aspire to something better, something you can work relatively independently, and I'll talk about the relationship of working as an individual within a team, because that's how work really gets done. But you lead people and you manage things. But if you don't measure it, you really can't manage it. You got to find a way to measure things in order to effectively manage them. At the end of the day, it's still all about people. We are people. Our society is made of people. We work with each other. We have different strengths, different weaknesses, different attributes, different technical skills. But at the end of the day, it's all about people. It is that fundamental. I already alluded to the fact when I went to Oregon, and it was right there in front of me, but it took a while for it to sink in, that the issues that existed that needed to be turned around in this $2 billion program in Oregon, they weren't engineering issues. The engineering was fine, and if there were issues, they got resolved. They were people issues, and it was costing everybody money. The client, the Oregon Department of Transportation, contractors, consultants, and the joint venture, and it was costing them a lot of money. They weren't engineering issues. They were people issues. And so it's my way of emphasizing that at the end of the day, issues are almost always, or significant issues, people issues. An important thing to remember. I thought that Peter Drucker put this better than me, and of course you can read this as well as I can. That management is doing things right, that is being efficient. Leadership is doing the right things. And within an organization, sometimes you will be faced with, where do you set the priorities? And I'm going to say first, the most important asset any organization has is their people. If you make it the work they're doing, which is important, it absolutely is. But if you're sending the signal that it's all about the work and the people are not important, you've just created a mess. You've got to have the people. You've got to take care of them. And I would even go as far to say that, and I learned this in Oregon, that my first temptation was to say that the client was the most important. But they were darn important, and you can imagine that was one of my lessons, to make sure they knew they were important. That's the only reason we were there. But I say the employees in an organization are the most important. And I'll say in Oregon, it was because they're the ones who are going to deliver the services and products to the client. So if I didn't take care of them, they were not going to be enabled to take care of the client, right? And I believe it's true in the Department of Roads. It's true anywhere else. The people within an organization, they're the most important, because they're the ones who are going to get the real work done. If you're not taking care of them, your priorities are not right. Okay. So at the end of the day, it's all about people. I want to switch a little bit, and this is, I could spend a long time talking about trust. And if you Googled or for trust equations, you could find several. Trust is what underlies relationships. And mind you, relationships and trust are between people, individuals, not between organizations. They're between individuals. It's who we are as human beings. And I'll say in this equation, the most salient part, I think, and it relates to this humility that I mentioned in an earlier slide, that SO in the denominator is self-orientation. This came to the fore in Oregon. I won't spend a lot of time talking about it unless you want to ask me some questions. Is that if you're more important, you as an individual, or your organization is more important than the people you're working with, or you're working for, or working for your client, you're gonna transmit that pretty well. It's all about your interest, right? Not the other person's interest. And we all have interests. We're all going to have it. Public sector does, private sector does, but if you at least try, if not, understand the other party's interests, their concerns, that goes a long ways. That opens up communications. People are complimented that you are at least attempting to understand, if not understand and value their perspective. It can be a very difficult thing to do. Trust is the basis for relationships, and I say that the relationships, they really do rule the world. Whether it's in the public sector, whether it's in the private sector, any combination, it really is all about people. And the reason is it's because human nature fundamentally doesn't change. One of these things I perhaps learned from my worldwide assignments around in the Corps of Engineers is human nature. People are people. They have their differences, but fundamentally they're the same. The trust is really the foundation that holds relationships together. And I'll ask a question here. What is the hardest thing to do in the world? I'm asking this, and I'll answer it here. And it's changing how someone thinks. I believe that that's the hardest thing to do in the world. And the reason is because you can't change how someone thinks. They are the only ones that can change how they think. This is true in our professional lives, and it's true in our personal lives. Spouses get divorced because they can't change how they think. They can't, I'll talk about listening here in a minute, value, or at least indicate the value of the other person's perspective. Countries go to war because they can't change how they think. They can't empathize. There's another word that was from an earlier slide, with the other party. It can be very difficult, and they all play into this notion of trust. Listening. Listening is part of communications, and it's talked about all the time, but it is a critical part of trust building because, I'll say, listening enables you to be changed by the other person. And that's what you need to indicate people. You may not agree with them. You may not be able to agree with them, but at least understanding their perspective and their values and their interests and opening yourself up to genuinely being changed, that is important. And that, I believe that underlies trust. So I keep relearning these notions, and again, I'm not making myself entirely clear, but think of your questions if you would, and ask me, and perhaps I can do some storytelling and further clarify some of these points. Collaboration. What does collaboration mean? Essentially, it's working together. And I already alluded to the fact that although we can get work done as an individual, at least the vast majority of work that is done as a group, it's done as a team, it's done as an organization. And collaboration is extremely important. There are different dimensions to this. I'll just try and mention a few. You'll hear the term public-private partnerships. I can't tell you how many times I hear that. And there's a narrow definition of that, and there's a broader definition. The broader definition is we do it all the time. There are public-private partnerships. The Department of Roads works with consultants and contractors and truckers and others all the time, as an example. Same thing we did in Oregon. And then there's a narrower definition of public-private partnerships, which I'm not talking about, but is related, which is the private sector puts in equity, that is money, and the public sector makes concession payments for the principal and interest for that private equity. So they're public-private partnerships, to be sure. They've gone on for decades, a long time. There are public-public-private partnerships, or public-public partnerships, too many P's, right? And you don't normally think of it in that term, but and I'll say at any level of government, on the public sector, whether it's local, whether it's state, whether it's federal, and you'll hear this periodically that, well, there are too many stovepipes. You can reach across between agencies at any of those levels and find common ground. That's important. Together you can do things you couldn't do independently. So public-public partnerships, that collaboration, that's another element that's important. Private-private partnerships, which go on all the time. There's teaming arrangements between consultants. Even my own Oregon Bridge Delivery Partners joint venture between Fluor and HDR, it was really a private-private partnership. Separate operating company. We certainly had an agreement between the two companies, and towards the end I negotiated and dissolved the joint venture because they no longer had a common interest. But that's a private-private partnership. And then you can have any mixture of the above. You really can. I won't go through that, but just broaden your perspective in terms of collaboration. There's any number of entities and people and organizations that you can collaborate with. University of Nebraska is a great example. I already mentioned that relationship between the Department of Roads and the University of Nebraska and the greater industry has been going on for decades and decades and decades, and a critical one. I recently read a survey of chief executive officers in the United States, and what they concluded was that collaboration was going to be increasingly important in the future. Not only that, ramped up collaboration was going to be more important going into the future. It took me a few minutes to kind of get my mind around that. Well, why would that be? And there's some very good reasons for that, whether you're in the public sector or whether you're in the private sector. In the public sector, your base, you're trying to serve the public good. Without going through the ins and outs of that. That is your role, serve the public good. In the private sector, you need to turn a profit. You've got to do that. Two sides of the same coin. They absolutely are. But this idea of ramped up collaboration, why is that? I would say because there's no individual, there's no team, there's no organization that has both all the strengths and the skill sets to get work done. Our world is getting more complicated, including in transportation. There are partners in transportation, and this is quickly evolving, that didn't exist a few years ago. I intended to bring my smartphone out and wave it. We probably all have a smartphone, right? The digital revolution, it is changing our lives, and quickly, and it's going to continue to. Whether it's how revenue is generated for transportation, I can talk about that. Whether it's Verizon, which you've probably never heard in the arena of transportation, but they're getting there, and they have a lab established for transportation. IBM's Watson computer, which may not mean anything to you. All of these things are being pulled into transportation, and so the idea of not only new partners and collaboration, but ramped up collaboration with all of those entities is going to become more important in the future. And the reason is to better serve the public good. Part of it to do more with less, which gets to be kind of a nasty word sometimes, but that's the truth, and that relates in the private sector as well. Or to turn a profit in the private sector. It has to happen, so you can't let yourself get trapped into a stovepipe. And in order to open up those opportunities for collaboration, I would assert that it takes leadership. Somebody has to go out there and do that, and there's some risk involved. Some will work, some will fail, some won't work. But that, nevertheless, leveraging the strengths of others to a mutually beneficial good. So I'm going to wrap this up and simply say the world is changing, and we have to change with it. And while traditional engineering and construction will continue, the things you're learning, it is not enough. And I'll give an analogy here. And I'll close it up and ask for whatever questions you got. Engineering economics is an example. That's tried and true. It's been around for probably 100 years, maybe longer than that. It's not going to go away. Weighing in broader economics, when I was in the Department of Roads, there was some discussion about that. I could never get myself to thinking, it was the right time to expand our economics for how we did work, how we set priorities, so on and so forth. And frankly, there weren't good processes for doing it. That's evolving. I go to Oregon. The number one goal for the Oregon Transportation Investment Act Free State Bridge Delivery Program, that's a long name for this $2 billion program. The number one goal was economic stimulus. There were 5 goals that were established by the state legislature in conjunction with the Oregon Department of Transportation. No mention of bridges. We're supposed to repair or replace 365 bridges, right? That was the mission. But the number one goal, which was superior to that, was economic stimulus. And there was a good reason for that, because Oregon, when we encountered our economic downturn in this country, a little less so in Nebraska, Oregon was more strongly hit than many states. And so their unemployment rate was high. They were not doing well economically. So no surprise. And we reported on the economic stimulus, whether jobs created or sustained, or how taxes were being generated and where they went, or spending and respending. This was one of my educations at John, was a broader economic perspective. So the world is changing, but traditional engineering construction is not enough. So as a leader, especially,